All right. Hey, thank y'all so much for being here and appreciate it. We are recording, and so we able to do this training time for our churches. Really focusing this will go across all 4 counties between here and Walton to be able to share what we do. Of course, with all of our stuff is whatever's captured here today. We're happy to go along to that any church and help them customize it. And so to be able to share really kind of a 1 hour compressed time on this topic. So thankful. Dr. Sharon Thompson, Director of Counseling, does a phenomenal job on all things counseling here through our ministry center. And so she's going to let you kind of introduce and navigate our time together. So Dr. T, welcome.
So thank you all for coming. We want to say again, thank you for your continual support and trust in us as clinicians here. So just on a celebratory note, we just had someone come to press in the counseling session just an hour ago. So, you know, we always are so grateful when we have this opportunity. So I want to talk just a moment before we have several other speakers who are going to be really outstanding. So I'd like to talk just about, we call them soft skills in our field. I know all of you have a seminary class or will have, or maybe you have in one in counseling, right? So when someone talks about sexual abuse or sexual trauma, that's a huge topic, right? And it's a lot of trust in you as a minister when they're telling you this. And so what we want to do first, immediately when someone says that, is just have a very compassionate look and say, I'm so sorry. Right? Not, I understand, because even if that happened to you, still you don't understand that, their situation. Not, I know how you feel. Not, well, you know, Jesus can heal that. All those things may be true, but we really just want to say, I'm so sorry that that happened to you, because at the moment, that's what they need to hear in that first moment of telling, realizing that for some people, you may be the very first person they ever even said the words to. We had a client who was 75, who had been raped multiple times from age 4 until age 24, and she had never said the word rape until last week. And so, and she said it first, she remembers. So, you know, it's so important for them to feel that compassion. Many people, especially who experience sexual trauma as children, it's very confusing for a child, as you well know, right? Because the body responds in the very same way, whether it is trauma or not, the body still experiences that as pleasure. So for a concrete thinking kid, you know, my body is having this response and it feels good. And so because it feels good, I must have wanted it. Or I must be bad because this feels good. And so there's a lot of mixed messages maybe that someone said to them, that they said to themselves, and that they've internalized. And so we want to be aware of that, that there's always shame and guilt associated with sexual trauma because the body responds, right? Regardless. And so a physical response does not mean that there was a desire. So with that being said, I want to introduce my colleagues. So I'm going to introduce Denise, and she's going to introduce then Mindy. And so this is Denise Hudson. She is one of the best counselors that we have here. She can do everything. And so she does marriage counseling, she does trauma, she does kids, she does adults, she does couples. Really, really excellent. We're so blessed to have her. So she's going to talk just for a minute.
Hey, it's nice to meet you guys and to be here with you. Just for a few minutes, I want to give you my background. So I taught in the public school system for 17 years before I became a counselor. And before that, I worked for 4 years in the child abuse field. So I'm very familiar with talking to kids who've gone through things, now working with them on the trauma side of it and helping them to work through those things and process through it even as adults. So just a couple of things, and some of the stuff you already know, but it's going to be really important for you to make sure that all of your volunteers and the people in your churches are trained on this as well, because some things are going to be common sense to you guys, but they may not be common sense to other people. So making sure that you have those discussions and that you talk to people about it who are in contact with kids. But one of the first biggest things is not to ever promise confidentiality. So when a child comes to you, if they say, you know, hey, you can't tell anybody what I say, right? Or do you promise you won't tell anybody? You know, the biggest thing is, well, there are certain times I can't promise that. If you or someone you know has been hurt or is going to be hurt, I may have to get somebody else involved just because I care about you so much. Because the worst thing to happen is you promise a kid, I'm not going to tell anybody, and then you realize like, oh, this wasn't just like somebody called me a bad name. This is serious and I have to get other people involved. And when the kid finds out that you're getting other people involved, they may still be mad at you. And so I always tell them, I promised you I would keep you safe. And I promised you that if it was something that was going to hurt you, that I would get other people involved. I'm just keeping my promise to you. And so that usually helps a little bit after the fact. Also, just to remain calm. If a child tells you anything, just to remain calm, to let them know they didn't do anything wrong, that everything, and to make it, to not act in a way that you're like, oh, what happened? Oh my Lord, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. The calmer that you can remain, the calmer they will remain. And they'll realize that like, okay, I'm not in trouble. I didn't do anything wrong. They usually don't want to get anyone in trouble. They might tell you like, I want to tell you this, but please don't say anything. And you have to just be as calm as you can so that, you know, as you're talking to them, that they know that everything's going to be okay. If they say something and they're really vague, it's important to ask very few questions and very non-leading questions. So if a kid comes in and says like, hey, you know, I'm being abused. Okay, so what does that look like? Because for one person, it might be like, oh, you know, my teacher yelled at me or my mom yelled at me. Okay, for somebody else, it could be that they're being sexually molested. And so like, what does that look like to you? Can you give me an example? And then as soon as you know, especially if it's any kind of sexual abuse, stop the questions, because they can only be questioned a certain number of times, and you are not one of those people. So you want to make sure that the professionals are the ones asking the questions, because it's not your job to do the investigation. It's your job to hear that child, to listen to their concerns, to remain calm, and then to pass on the information to other people. If you're not sure, you know, you hear something, a child tells you something and you're like, I don't really know if this qualifies as abuse, you can call the child abuse hotline, 1-800-96-ABUSE, and you can just tell them, hey, listen, I have this scenario and can I run it by you? Absolutely. And you tell them and they'll say, yeah, that doesn't really qualify. And you can go, okay, good. The conversation's over. Or they may say, yeah, I'm going to need some more information. And so then you know that you've done what you need to do and that, you know, you're good. The information that you need to know, you're going to need to know the child's name, the child's age, if you don't know their date of birth, and you may not, but the child's age, their address, if you have it, if there are any other children living in the home, the parents' names, if you know them and their approximate age, and then any other information that you have. And you may not have very much, and that's okay. You just tell them, and then it's their job to go out and find out if there's something going on. It could be that there's not. As a teacher and as a guidance counselor, I did that for 1.5 years. I made a lot of calls, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all to do. And people will call you and they'll say, I know you did this. They told me they didn't, but they can usually tell by the wording, you know, and what the what they say. They'll usually figure out who did it, and that's okay, but our job is just to make sure that that child is safe over anything else. You may lose people in your church over it, and that's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, you have to go with knowing that you had this information and you needed to know if there was something to it or not. And that's not your job. It's not your job to call the parents and say, hey, this kid told me this. Is that really happening? Because especially if it's a parent, they're not going to say, yeah, I'm abusing my kid. What's it to you? They're not going to say that to you. In fact, they're probably then going to keep their child away from you. and then you may lose them completely. So that's really important. And then just offering continued support and referring them for counseling, referring the families. A lot of times parents will blame themselves that they didn't know that something was happening. They'll be like, how did this happen in my own home? And I had no idea. And it's very possible. It's very possible. I have a very close friend. She was actually a child abuse investigator, and there was sexual molestation happening in her home, and she had no idea. And she's like, I investigate this stuff. I should have been the one to figure it out. But there was no way, because perpetrators are good. They're good at what they do. They're really good. And they will convince children either that it's normal, that it's perfectly okay what's happening, that this is how, adults show kids that they love them. Or they'll scare them into not telling. And that child will think that, they're going to hurt their family or somebody else. And so you can definitely know that it can go on for years and people in the home not know it. And that's something that they have to live with too. And so making sure that you refer the entire family for counseling and for additional assistance. And then just not ignoring something, when you hear, I've had kids come to me, and as a teacher, of course, I'm a mandatory reporter, and they would tell me something and then say, but you can't tell anybody. You're not going to tell anybody. You're not reporting this. I'm just telling you because I needed somebody to talk to, and you're not going to say anything. And then my response would be like, well, you know that I can't do that. You know that I have to get other people involved. And then usually they'd follow that up with, I've told 3 other teachers already and they haven't told anybody. Why do you have to? That is the worst feeling in the world, to think that other adults who are responsible people knew about this and did nothing, and it continued to happen. So, as horrible as it is and as hard as it is to make that phone call, it's something that you have to do to look out for that kid for sure. And then Mindy is going to come up next, and she's going to tell you kind of after you make the call, what happens. And she's also a counselor here and also works for the Sheriff's Department. And I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her role. Yes.
What was that phone number again?
1-800-96-ABUSE, ABUSE. You're welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Like Denise said, my name is Mindy Young, and I kind of have 2 different roles. I've been a deputy sheriff at Escambia County Sheriff's Office for 23 years, and then I'm also a registered mental health counselor, and I have the privilege to work here as a therapist. So I've seen abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse from the law enforcement perspective and as a therapist in the office. So my question to each of you is, did y'all know how to make an abuse report? Did you know what way you're supposed to do it? So think about how many people you have interaction with every single day and what the statistics of victims potentially in your churches or with people you deal with, and yet nobody knows how to report. That's one of the reasons why nobody does something, because nobody knows what to do. You don't ask the question because you don't know the answer. You don't ask the question because you're afraid of the response you're going to get. And you definitely don't want to ask a child, is something going on, and then say yes, because then now that puts you in the hot seat and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So as a law enforcement officer, it was real easy for me. I knew exactly what I needed to do if I worked a case. Then when I transitioned over and I became a therapist, I had a client who was raised in a very Christian home, and their father was abusing her and her other two sisters for years and years and years, and told them that the Bible told him to do it, and it was teaching them to become good wives and spouses. So now I'm sitting in a civilian role as a therapist, and I'm like, how do I report this? Because it's a very different process. In reality, it's not. There's so much literature for you to go to and to educate yourself and know exactly what you need to do and how you need to do it. And then by the time you leave here, I'm gonna have the actual experts at the back of the room come up and answer all your questions that you might have. But the Department of Children and Families is the one that houses the abuse hotline number. They have the phone number that you can call, and there's also an online portal. The phone number, if you call it, you're going to be on hold for quite some time. The easy way to do it is to go online. All you got to do is type in the abuse hotline. It'll pop up, and it is very simple to follow through. I'm going to pass this around. I think Dr. Null is going to upload the link that you literally could just go on and click, and it'll take you right there. But it'll give you an idea as to what the report is asking for. All reporting is 100% confidential. You don't have to worry about them going and saying, so-and-so came and told me this and did this, because a lot of times that is the hesitation and the worry is, what if I'm wrong? What if this is made up? I don't want someone to be mad at me. They know where I live at. I don't want to put myself and my family at risk. So you don't have to worry about that because you are afforded the confidentiality piece. So I'm gonna pass this around. You can peruse it and look at the information that is included. You don't have to get all the gory details, but they're gonna explain to you kind of actually what they want, like what they really want you to do from the investigative side and from a law enforcement perspective that will help all the way to the end. So you can do the reporting call or you can do it online. It's a whole lot easier. And then with that, any questions for me before I leave? So Investigator Suzanne Pollock and Sergeant Sean White are going to come up. They're going to explain to you what we do. Well, not me anymore, because I haven't done one of these forever. But, you know, what does it look like once it comes to the law enforcement office? What is it, the process? How does it look? What happens? And those are a lot of the questions people don't know. I encourage you, please ask questions. Don't be afraid. I'll sit at the back of the room. I'll ask questions for you if you don't. Okay. So use them to help ease any of your fears or worries. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Like she said, I'm Sean White, I'm Sergeant over the SVU unit at the Sheriff's Office. I've been in this office about 21 years. Spoken in front of many people before, and the best thing I need y'all to do is if you have a question, please ask it. Normally we have these in front of law enforcement, so it's a little bit easier to talk about on the level that we want you at. So if on the civilian side, if you have any questions, please ask them as we go along. This is Suzanne. I couldn't do it without her. I also have 4 other investigators that are assigned. So we roughly have like 320,000 people in Escambia County. If you just say like 1% of them, how was that, like 3,000 people? So let's just say a year, just on, I only have 5 investigators that actually get assigned a sexual abuse or child abuse case. We also work adult cases, sexual battery cases, and elder abuse cases. So plays a little full when it comes to that kind of stuff. So let's start off on the aspect of interviews. If you get caught in a situation where somebody divulges something to you. So I think it was said of something like so many interviews. That is a misconception, still diluted to this day. It only comes down to the first judicial judge, over the First Circuit judge. He makes the rules. He says there's only 3 interviews. First, disclosure to law enforcement or DCF does not count. We need that disclosure. A disclosure has to happen for the very first interview to happen. And that's with the Gulf Coast Kids House, the CPT interviews with law enforcement. The second interview that counts is reserved for the state attorney's office, and the third interview is reserved for the defense. So if a child comes to you and says, I'm being sexually abused, or I am being abused, and they're willing to talk, please do not shut them down. They're coming to you because they trust you. If you shut that child down and they're coming to you for help, are they actually getting that help? Are you sitting there saying, hey, don't talk to me, I can't talk to you? So I'm telling you that your interview or your discussion doesn't count towards that interview. So if they're not wanting to talk to you or just being vague, don't encourage them, don't push that interview. With that being said, if they're willing to talk to you, so perfect example, child's at school or a child somewhere that sees a DCF video, and they like, oh my gosh, my dad does this to me, and they tell a friend. Well, then the friend comes and tells you, hey, I think my friend is being abused, and then you go talk to that child, and that child just ends up telling you things that no child should ever say. Well, you don't want to shut that child down. And that child can actually tell you more information than they may tell us, or even the CPT interview when it happens. That makes sense? You got anything to add to that?
No, we do get those all the time. A kid will tell a friend, an age mate, that friend has a very close relationship with their parent or their teacher. They'll report to them. So we do get reports like that all the time that just have gone full circle before we ever get to the kid. And I think the pass arounds are going, but we printed off this thing for mandatory reporting. There are certain people in the state of Florida, like school teachers, law enforcement, have no excuse at all, but the state of Florida does make everyone a mandatory reporter. But you do get the benefit of not having to disclose your name when you report. We have to divulge who we are, but y'all do not. And we also get cases all the time, unfortunately, where a student will go to a teacher and tell them something's happening, but the teacher says later that it just sounded too absurd. It sounded ridiculous, so they didn't report it. Finally, the kid ran away from home and went into some stranger's house and just raided their fridge, ate till she vomited, and law enforcement was called, and we opened a full investigation, and all of those outrageous claims were very true, and we found all of it on recorded home surveillance system. And all of those teachers that were told for 3 years in a row were all arrested. So y'all, obviously it's very important to report. I don't care if you think it sounds silly or sounds ridiculous. I mean, it was sick, sadistic stuff being done to this little girl, and it's not your job to investigate it or to say if it's true or not. We're just asking you to please report it. And hopefully the pass arounds will tell you how and what we're looking for, and the different statutes, and just will provide more information on that.
So you probably also may get a disclosure from a child. Who in here has never told a lie? Okay. So we will have children that will get in trouble, and they'll make a very huge lie and say they've been sexually abused. And they may come to you and say this, and you know in your back of your mind that that's absolutely BS. But that's not for you to investigate. It's still for you to report it. That's for us to make that determination based on evidence and based on more interviews that need to be done in the household and things along those lines. But there will be those times that children do lie, teenagers lie. So they will get to that level, and it's not up to you guys. It's just be able to be safe and sorry. Go ahead and just report that abuse, and then we'll take it over from there and make that determination. DCF gets involved, goes to his house, we'll get involved. We have to do a working relationship with those guys. So it's not up to y'all. Just take the burden off you guys. If y'all not we're responsible for it. Or it comes back later on. And, hey, oh my gosh, I thought it was a lie. Here it is a year later, and then that person did get abused or was sexually abused. Also, too, I understand that maybe some of y'all want to be anonymous. There's probably some sort of clergy in this room. But I encourage you, if you believe that the abuse is about to happen and it's going to be immediate, please contact law enforcement. All right. At that point in time, that person's life is more in jeopardy than that confession.
So if that person comes in and says, I'm about to go home and abuse my kid, physical or sexual, please contact us. We want the law enforcement present immediately. Now, you have somebody comes in and says, hey, I gotta get this off my chest. 20 years ago, I abused my 4-year-old when she was 4. I abused her when she was 4. There's no sense in contacting law enforcement time. You just make that disclosure to DCF and anonymous, and we still look at that. But if it's going to be immediate, please get law enforcement involved immediately. DCF will still be in contact. There'll still be services provided to the family, regardless if there's an arrest made or not. There's still services provided to that family. So we just encourage that. We're going for, you might have any questions so far? Any? No? So,
Someone mentioned earlier that there's some, if someone comes to you and says that they're raped or whatever by an age mate, maybe a 15-year-old says a 16-year-old raped her or whatever, maybe there's some misunderstanding about that or about the laws around that. I'm not sure, but to touch on that, in the state of Florida, a person consents at the age of 16 with someone less than 24. So there is an age range where consensual sexual encounter is not necessarily illegal. However, rape in any age is something to report. And again, always just go ahead and make that report into the hotline. And also, a lot of people think that DCF has to take or will take all cases. That's generally when the abuse is done by a caregiver to the child. So if you're on the phone and DCF says they're not going to send anyone out, a lot of people think that DCF is not going to take your case. That's not what they're saying. They're saying they're going to send everything that you reported just straight to law enforcement. DCF gets involved when the abuse or neglect is done by a caregiver. So it doesn't mean you're going unheard at all. It just gets disseminated differently, if that makes sense. A lot of people say, I tried to make a report and they wouldn't take it. And that's just not the case. They just don't understand how it's sent out. So send it in anyway, and the online portal works. I use it myself. It really does work. And they actually give you a confirmation number that you can have for your records that you did report.
also,
Georgia, what if they have a parent come to them and say that my 10-year-old son has been touching my 7-year-old daughter at bedtime? What should they do in that situation?
they should contact DCF or law enforcement at that point in time. It needs to be documented. It will be reported to law enforcement only on the basis of reporting on. When I get a child on child, 12 and under, I do not assign those cases to any of my investigators. At that stage, it can be curious. Usually they're just trying to find themselves out along with another person. They have hormones running through their body. There's no sense in putting a child through criminal procedures when we can allow DCF to get involved and provide social services to the family and some therapy work in order to do so. So that has been very beneficial, but I'm not going to put a 12-year-old child, 8-year-old child, 7-year-old child in jail just because they discovered their vagina or the penis. And they're just kind of curious about it. So, but those will be reported and the services will be provided to the family, but we just don't assign those type of cases.
But like with that being said, if DCF is notified, they'll have an investigator go talk to the child. And if they learn from the child that that was a learned behavior from an adult, like so-and-so did it, so they are just doing it to, re-abusing, then of course we take it. And that does happen a lot. And that's how we get cases is the children start to touch each other. And we later find out it was learned behavior from a parent or a caregiver that was abusing the child. So it's still, anything can be elevated and sent up to us. So you're just never wrong to report it and just let it play out because it can go either way and often does. But DCF will get, and if it's true curiosity, then there could be services in the home or whatever. And a lot these kids are always on the cell phone or on the computer, and there's nastiness in their hands all day, every day, and access to videos and stuff. It could be something they saw on YouTube, but a parent needs to know and monitor. And there's just people in place that will help communicate that out and make sure the kid's safe. So just the number one thing is you just can never go wrong. And that online recording system makes it so easy that there's really just no reason why anybody wouldn't.
And another layer to that is I'm at a barbecue with my family and Sally comes and says, oh my gosh, you're never gonna believe what I heard. I heard that, Sue and Charlie, are abusing your children. So if the disclosure is not directly to me, do I still need to report and make a abuse hotline report? Or do I have a layer of protection because it was relayed to me through a third party person?
You're never
Well,
wrong by reporting.
True, but the statute actually reads, any person who knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that a child is abused, abandoned, or neglected by a parent, legal guardian, caregiver, or other person responsible for that child's welfare is a mandatory reporter and must report that activity. So
So essentially, anybody that breathes air is required to report
Well,
if they heard.
exactly.
Now, you may not have any evidence, and it could be just that hearsay over the campfire stories. Hey, I hear they're in an argument and they abuse their kids, and you have no proof of it other than third party. There's still nothing wrong with notifying DCF. DCF will go to the house, do a welfare check on the kids, things along those lines. If they think that there is some sort of environmental or abuse going on, they'll make sure that law enforcement is aware of it as well. So there's nothing wrong at any point in time. If you just suspect it or just something that doesn't feel right, contact law enforcement. We get inappropriate behavior. DCF went to do a welfare check on it, and they saw a picture of a girl sitting on a guy's lap, and the girl looked uncomfortable. So it's not illegal. It's just needed to be documented just in case anything further comes about it. So it's, whatever you think, never wrong, just by reporting.
Yes, it's most of the guidance we appreciate has been with the minor involved. Often there can be counseling and other situations where it is two adults and pastors here, they're in the middle of some talk, but whether it's domestic or not related, what guidance would it be when it's two adults and there's speculation of how do you navigate potential abuse there? How would that be different from a minor's not involved? How would we navigate potential abuse, physical issues, non-consensual sexual issues?
It just all depends on what type of crime it is, because this one protects juveniles. You have your mandatory reporter when it comes to juveniles, 16 and under,
Yes.
you have to report.
Yes.
When it comes to adults, they have the ability to become a victim or not be a victim. So you can say that, hey, two adults are in a physical altercation, you can witness it. Now, the state, when it comes down to domestic violence situations, we don't particularly need the victim's cooperation. We can still make the arrest on them. But an adult has that right not to be a victim. So you can notify law enforcement. It's not DCF when it comes to the adults. We do have an adult DCF, but it's for elderly abuse. But when it's two adults that say they're 30 years old and they come in there and they're in the room together and all of a sudden it gets heated and one slaps the other one, call law enforcement. They come out there and they're like, he didn't hit me. There's no mark, but you're a witness. Most likely there may not be an arrest, but there at least should be documentation because Florida state statute requires us to document those types of violations.
So if any of these guys or whatever, they're ministering in somebody's home or it's at the church campus and some type of abuse is shared with them, they would have to guide that individual to make the call. They couldn't call on their individual's behalf. They could just be there when they make the call.
You can call on their behalf. It's third party.
Okay.
If we can go there and do like basically a 10-4 check and knock on the door, make sure everything's all right, and say, hey, we heard there was maybe a disturbance earlier in the day. And if it's not uncommon that most likely they will not tell on each other. Because if they're still in that relationship together, they don't want to see the other person go to jail. So you'll also see, and we'll revert back to even juveniles. Juveniles will disclose. Let's go back in the part of the little girl sees video at DCF, tells friend tells guidance counselor. Law enforcement's involved. law enforcement goes out to the property, looks at it, realizes child abuse and child neglect also plays a part. So they arrest the family members. We've just ripped this child from everything that they know in a matter of 4 hours. This child doesn't want dad to get in trouble, just wants the abuse to stop. And they'll recant it. They'll close down, they'll shut down, they just want their life back to being normal. Don't feel bad if that happens. It does happen. They just want the abuse to stop. Same thing with the adults. We'll go out there for many calls. You'll go to the same call probably 3 times in a 4-day period. It's the victim's basically saying, I just want the abuse to stop. I don't want them to go to jail. They have all the money. They have everything's in their name. If they go to jail, then my world's upside down. I just want them to stop. But you are not babysitters. I mean, we can't go around, I got 320,000 people in Escambia County, and there's roughly 400 sworn. We can't babysit everybody. So you can only do what you can at your ability. And if you believe that some sort of criminal act, regardless of age, has happened, there's nothing wrong with even sending a deputy out to 2 adults for a temporary check. Does that make sense?
Question.
I got an answer.
Investigator Pollard brought up a good point. The wonderful world of
I'm glad you mentioned it.
internet. So what do they do about sexting and inappropriate pornographic pictures, and what are the guidelines surrounding that?
So sexting revolves around the juveniles, and they usually get a citation for that, and it happens a lot in the school system. Really don't get investigated up here. It's just a sexting citation. But that's our-
because they're similar in age range.
That is correct. If it becomes down to an adult sends a naked picture to a child, it just all depends on. It just all depends. So if say for instance, a 15-year-old is in communication with a male and he's an adult, but the 15-year-old never divulges her age, and she, let's just say, has a body of a 20-year-old, there's no crime in that. He has to know that she is under, a certain age. He has to know that aspect of it. Yes, ma'am.
So if one of these ministers, they're in the church and community group, they have to look at their children, they see to make a picture of that.
Well, what age group are we talking?
6 through 12.
Well, one is child pornography. They can't have it on the phone. They should contact law enforcement at that point. And it just all depends on a lot of stuff, a lot of variables. So that did the child send them that picture? Did they take it themselves? Because then you have production, and you just not only just possession of it, but in the long run of it, if it's child on child, the most likely thing that ends up happening is we'll end up sending it to NCMEC. She'll explain that in a minute, and then we'll probably just end up deleting it from the child's phone. So, but it is child pornography. We don't want those. We want to be able to document it so that it's not a live victim at that point in time, and we're not going to go knock on somebody's door, through somebody's door, because they potentially have a live victim being abused at that time. Is that what NCMEC is?
Sure, NCMEC, I'm sure a lot of you've heard about it. It's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They deal with a lot of, the runaways and missing cases, but they also deal with child pornography. There's one other investigator at the Sheriff's Office along with me who also investigates child porn for the county. We're also assigned to the FBI task force, so we investigate on a federal level as well. And when we get those cases, a lot of times they were dating, whatever that means to a 6th grader, and the girl took it up herself. She sent it to the boy. They're no longer together. The boy mass shared it on Snapchat just to get back at her. It's usually something like that. But what we'll do is go ahead and take that phone, get those images off, and we send them to NCMEC, who will catalog them based on my sworn statement that at the time this photo was taken, it was a 15-year-old girl, or whatever age, she was a minor. Because a lot of times you're not going to get the face, it's just going to be a very up close and personal of a body part. So I will swear out that that is a child at the time it was taken, and NCMEC will catalog it. So once it hits Snapchat, it's now viral. You can never get it back. It's all over, it's everywhere. So what NCMEC will do is identify it by a certain value system, a number system. And if that photo ever shows up again anywhere on anyone's phone or device, it will flag as child pornography. And it will put on there that I am the person that will verify that it's a child. So whether, even though we don't prosecute it or do anything about it as far as charges, it is cataloged, and charges can come later if an adult or someone else is in possession of it, or just their view of pleasure. We do that.
But our number one evil is smartphones.
Oh,
Is there anything for parents that are outside the law enforcement realm to look at or research to stay on top of all the new apps, all the new programs like the Snapchat?
You can download like different apps. Bark's one of them. Norton has it where you can watch your child text. They can hone on keywords and things along those lines. We've gotten a few cases where parents have done that, but I don't understand why a 9-year-old child has to have a smartphone. Because if a 9-year-old child has a smartphone, that child probably has seen pornography. It's just the world that we live in right now, and with internet and social media has put our children on the front line of adulthood. They believe at certain ages, even young, 10, we've had 10-year-olds on, what's that roulette site? Omega.
Oh, Omegle.
Omegle. I don't know if anybody know what Omegle is, but basically you put in what your common
Interests are.
interests are, and it just gives almost like a Zoom call, but it's not traced. If anybody in the world, and a 10-year-old girl, grandma walks in and it's just completely naked in front of this, in front of all these people, and it just randomly, you can be done with that person, it goes to a random next person. So if parents are not putting guidelines on their children's devices, restricting them to see what they and who they talk to. I mean, there's not this sex offender in a white van with candy going up and down the street anymore. They're not going to the playgrounds. I mean, I've gone to drive by many playgrounds when I go through and help out. There's nobody at the playgrounds anymore. So everybody's most likely, all the children are indoors, either playing on PlayStation, Xbox, or whatever it is. And they're putting themselves on the front line. They're basically walking up, knocking on the front door of a sex offender or a potential one. Or she believes or he believes that it's my body, my choice, because it's the way society is portraying. So they get all these outside influences at a young age, and they're putting themselves out there. And they don't think anything's wrong with them. 13-year-old girl who's in a relationship with a 30-year-old guy. She's 100%, now you couldn't find any evidence of any sexual things in nature, but that's her boyfriend. So, I mean, the internet and social media has just ramped these children up to adults. We get kids in middle school having sex in the bathroom. Yes, sir.
So I guess what you're saying is, as we talk to parents and help parents try to figure out how to manage teenage years in specific, delay the introduction of these things.
Well, at least a smartphone. If they want to, if their excuse is, well, I need to be able to call my kid, you can go down to Walmart, get your little track phone. That costs like $5. And all it does is text and talk like it used to be. That's all that kid needs. Because in today's schools, they're providing Chromebooks. They have those for educational. I mean, everybody, normal person, I wouldn't say normal person, but the majority of individuals have a computer at home that they can do homework on that can be supervised. Why do they need to walk around or take their phone into the bathroom for 45 minutes? If we know what's going on, you ain't taking a shower for 45 minutes. But that's another one that came across my desk. 10-year-old girl, been in the bathroom 45 minutes, mom looks and she's looking at lesbian porn. So, I mean, if you're trying to help out that household as well, and it becomes, educate them on social media, educate them on the internet, that just at the fingertip, they can reach out to, individuals across the world. And, today's society, they could be whatever and whoever they want to be, and they may not find it in the school system, but they're going to find it somewhere, and it may not be local, and it could lead to something else.
Yeah, and to add to that, you'll get a lot of parents that'll tell you, oh, no, my kid's good. My kid, they're, they go to church, like, whatever. My kid would never do that. So a part of my job is also to go online undercover. I have tons of social media accounts. Some are, of course, some you have to lie about your age if you really are under 13 to get on Snapchat. If you're, whatever the rules of that site is, you have to lie if you're underage, and these kids do because they want the account like their friends have. But one of my accounts is not bad. I think she's 13, which I don't know how they don't notice she's been 13 for 5 years. But anyway, so this message just popped. There's nothing ugly on there. It's just it looks like a girl in school. And a message popped up from a guy that was right out the gate, a picture of his privates. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just a kid. You shouldn't send me stuff like that. And he's like, well, what does being a kid have to do with it? And so aggressive. And I kept saying over and over and over, I'm just 13. This is gross. I'm going to tell. And he kept sending more and more and more and more. And I wasn't trolling for it. I wasn't seeking it. And maybe their child isn't either. But it is just going to be put in their face regardless of what a good kid they are. And at the time, my caseload was slammed. I had no time for this dude. But he finally started sending photos of his face. And I was able to figure out exactly who he is. And he lives 10 minutes from the sheriff's office. So if you're going to keep on, then I'm going to show up. So anyway, he's in prison. And all it for blowing me up, it ended up being me, just an undercover police account. But still, I wasn't seeking it. So tell these parents that your child doesn't have, we're not saying your kid's a bad kid. We're saying the world is sick and evil, and we'll just put it in your kid's face. And that's the important message.
So a lot of people think that this child or this adult has already been through so much trauma and they're experiencing so much emotion already. And then now we report to law enforcement, the child's going to be put in a room with a bunch of cops. It's going to be a traumatic situation even further for the investigation, and they're going to have to testify. Can you kind of let them know how the environment is set up and how it is formatted to be as calm and caring as possible to reduce that trauma and exposure they might have?
Yeah, what is actually said by the judge. Like the first contact by law enforcement or DCF doesn't count. The second one has to be a confined interview. It's for that child. But ways worked at the Gulf Coast Kids House, the child's in a room with a CPT interviewer, and everybody else who's a part of it has to be outside. We can view it either live on scene, or we can pull it up through the internet and watch the interview. And if there's more questions that need to be said, that CPT interviewer will come out, talk to the investigator, and then go and ask more questions. But it's meant for a very comfortable environment.
We're all plain clothes. We all dress, in business tie every day. So even if the child saw us in the kid's house prior to their interview, they would have no clue we're a cop. We don't speak to the kid. We're just there to watch their interview from the glass on the other side. The parent will know we're there because we have questions for the parent, but we actually don't even approach the kid. The room is very relaxed, and it's kind of decorated comfortably, and it's just the child and that interviewer. And I don't know if you guys have been in the Gulf Coast Kids House, but it's very, very nice and accommodating and
very kid friendly. And even on sexual abuse, so sexual assault kits that are done. So Sacred Heart doesn't have any SANE nurses or with their sexual assault nurses in the PED section at Sacred Heart. They all go to Gulf Coast Kids House. They have an exam room there, they have a forensic room, and it's all done in a comfortable environment for the child. So I understand that, hey, it's been traumatic and it's been a long process for these kids, but once it gets into that process, it's all about the child.
Any other questions for them?
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Just a couple things that I want to clarify is, we understand that you guys do have a component of confidentiality. And so when Sergeant mentioned if a child or an adult comes and discloses to you, there's the fear of don't ask questions, don't talk to them, because you guys don't want to get involved. But the reason why they want you to ask the questions is because the information you get at that point is the most information half the time that child's going to give. That first moment when they have the feeling of disclosing what's been going on, they are ready for help. So you are not going to hurt anything. You are going to benefit them by asking, tell me what happened. Tell me when did this happen? Who did this to you? Get as much as you can because they need it. By the time it comes to them, there is a period of time that the child has gone through different stages. And by that point, they may have become reclusive again and decided to go into their own minds and not talk about it anymore. What you got, though, could be absolutely pivotal to them. Therefore, as he said, law enforcement's moments of time with them are a lot more restricted, okay? 3, they are able to go in, formulate their interview a lot more specific, get to the point, ask the questions that they need so that they can do a thorough investigation instead of just kind of trying to pick and, figure out where we need to go. So it helps in the long run. You have no time putting yourself at risk by asking the questions.
Any helpful guidance on documentation? Taking notes of stuff from it.
So, yeah, you take notes, but necessarily don't need them. If you do the DCF online, it's one of the things, you can be anonymous at that point, even on the clergy or underneath the practice of that'll be up to the state attorney at that point, but most likely you won't even be called to the stand. It says the initial investigation, and the more information that we have, and we can even talk to the suspect or fines. So if the child comes in and tells you, but doesn't tell the DCF investigator or CPT, but they tell you, hey, he took pictures of me. That's never discovered. We may never have it. If they tell you that, at least we have that tidbit of information, may not lead to a search warrant at that time, but we can press the issue in the interview. We don't know about it. We may not ask about it.
And also too, on the online recording, there's a big block for like summary, and you'll have all your notes there. Because hopefully you're making this report as soon as you heard it, or as soon as the kid leaves your space, you're on that portal, so it's fresh in your mind, and that is your notes section. And you can print out your report, and again, print that confirmation code that they'll send you right. It'll be immediate that you'll get a confirmation that it was received. You print that, and then that'll be your note system.
So after you submit it, you get an email summary, or you can download it, whatever it might be, for
Or
your
you
own
can-
files.
Or screen capture it, or whatever. If you're having trouble printing it, screen capture what your notes were.
Yeah,
But
the next
that
thing
is
is like,
the exact report that goes to DCF, so it will be printed out by them as well, and it'll be in a print form.
and that's one thing, we don't want you to be fear that you may have to testify or break some sort of code. And that's why I encourage it, if it's immediate, you may want to break that code. Like if you know for a fact that person's going to go traumatize another individual, please contact law enforcement. But if it's like a late disclosure, like, hey, a couple months ago, this person did this to me, you don't want to break that. Or the person comes in and confesses to you, you don't want to break that code. You can still do it anonymous, give as much information as you possibly can, and we can try to work it from that angle as well. So we don't want you to, y'all take what you do seriously. We don't want you to breach that as well, but we may need your help.
So if a kid does disclose something to us, what happens? So we go online, we fill out the child abuse form, we submit it. Now what happens? Obviously, part of this doesn't want to send the kid back into a placement at the home. Like, how fast does that work? Do I let little Susie go back to mom and dad?
But it all depends.
So,
Sure, yeah.
so Denise may be able to help with that DCF. They have so many hours, depending on what the allegation is.
They have
the
4 to
investigator
24 hours to respond.
has X amount of time to get to that home, correct?
Yeah.
So
It all depends, 4 to 24 hours, depending on the crime. If it's like immediate arrest made, something along those lines, that's like a 4-hour response. If the abuse just occurred, they'll probably come out with it. It's at least 4 hours. They got to notify, get all the information. What's that?
There's someone constantly monitoring.
Oh, yeah, once it goes, there's like almost like a 24-hour hotline. No matter what, if you call that 1-800 number, somebody's going to end up picking up the phone at some point. It's like a state hotline. So they'll ask you what county, things along those lines to direct it. And then depending on the crime, depends on when DCF may show up. But like I said, DCF has about 4 to 24 hours. But if you think it's going to be immediate, patrol will respond a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And DCF will still be notified. So let's just say abuse happens, like she comes in and she's got a bloody nose and she just got beat up in the park right out here to come talk to you. You find out, we'll call law enforcement. DCF will get involved. Let's just say off that there's an arrest being made. The child will still go to the Gulf Coast Kids House through DCF. There still will be this interview that's done and a court procedure will go on from there. Let's just say it wasn't immediate. She just closed, like every time I go to my dad's house during the summertime, I get abused. And here it is Christmas time. Then you submit that DCF. DCF will get it. As soon as they get it, they'll shoot us a copy of it. We'll generate a report. They'll start doing their investigation along with us, our investigation, and then we'll make the determination if we can find. Now, there may not be an arrest, they may not be done, because I'd rather have a guilty man walk than put an innocent man in jail. Does that make sense? So if I come to you and I don't know who you are, and your child says, he punches me every day I come into the house. If I have no physical evidence of it, one time playing, it's kind of hard to take that child over there, depending on the child's age. So they was 13 and he knows right from wrong. Why does that child hold more weight than yours? So we like to have some evidence base going off of it. And there could be numerous things, or there's previous history of child abuse in the house. A lot of things go along with it that may sway to the victim's way. But if it's even all the way through, there may not be an arrest until something teeters to the arrest. Does that make sense? But I don't want you to believe that there's nothing being done.
Yeah, I guess there's part of me, if someone were to disclose that, especially a child, part of me wouldn't, if they're talking about their home, their mom, their dad, whoever lives with them, I wouldn't want them to go back to that home, even if something happened 3 weeks ago. I have the possibility that that might happen again, but if DCF is on pretty quick.
Yeah, they have 4 to 24 hours.
Quick
Yeah.
window, then I feel a little easier about saying, okay, well, now that our conversation is done, I'm gonna go
Yeah,
my
there's
due diligence and
the same aspect of like, hey, dad slaps me around every day and they have no markings of it. But you're like, man, that dynamic, I know that family and that dynamic can have potential violence in the home. I don't feel comfortable. You'll say all those things in your DCF report. And then DCF will make a determination within that 4 to 24-hour time period when they'll respond. So somebody will go out there, at least determine what the next step may be. They may end up removing the child from that home depending on the environmental things in the house, hazards, stuff like that. So there could be that resolved as well. But if it's immediate with bruising, actual evidence of some sort of physical crime, I mean, law enforcement needs to be contacted at that point as well.
And that's the biggest thing is don't ever not feel you can call law enforcement. If you're not sure, or you have a bad gut feeling, or you want to get somebody else's opinion, call law enforcement. They will come out because we have to report it to DCF just the same like y'all do. We go through the same reporting format.
Sure do.
So if you ever have a point where you're like, yeah, I'm not really sure, but I'm not comfortable, call law enforcement. Let them kind of move that monkey off your back, and then they'll take care of it. That way you don't have to send the child home. And if the officer feels like there's something more, they will do what they need so the child doesn't go home.
I was just going to add, just because there's not an arrest, it doesn't mean there are not things happening. Because a lot of times those cases will still go to court, it's called dependency court, and that judge still might order either supervised visitation or no contact for a certain amount of time. Counseling, they might have them, order them to do certain things, before they can see the child again or move back into home. And a lot of times those people are not arrested because it's a different burden of proof.
Yes.
The evidence is different. So just because law enforcement doesn't do what we might think they need to as civilians, it doesn't mean that something's not being done. So just keep that in mind too.
And the last piece as we kind of close out is education is the biggest part. Being aware, staying educated, being up with what's happening in the times. You know, when we talk about the phones and how dangerous the internet is, there's different things you can tell your members of the church that they can do every day to keep their children safe. Don't let them go into their rooms and close the door and get on computers. Always have them be out in the living room in open space. Don't think your children aren't going to delete stuff, because they will delete. Okay. For every Instagram account they have, expect that they have another one. Okay. Always add one to it, and look into the different programs he mentioned about finding things in their phone, because they will delete it. They absolutely will. If they're not telling you about it, they know it's wrong. They're going to cover it up. So educating the people that you talk to is one of the biggest protective measures that can take place.
Because there's Instagram has like eyes only. Y'all don't know anything about Instagram. So, and then there's Pandora boxes that take secret codes, open up in order to get pictures and text messages. So there's all kind of stuff out there to be hidden inside the phone, but usually those apps can track it. So,
Well, we thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. If y'all have any other questions, I'm sure you can reach out to Dr. Knoll, and then he will relay it to me, and then I'll of course go to them.
Thank you guys very much.
thank you guys.
Thank you all so much for coming. If we can serve you anybody here, we would love to. So unfortunately, we've become, we developed quite a bit of expertise with porn addiction with kids and adolescents and adults. We never thought as faith-based counselors that'd be what we used to get really good at, but we've gotten really good at it. So we can help on a number of levels. We have recently been working with First Baptist Orlando, developed a new trauma treatment protocol to train lay counselors and ministers. If you're, somebody there's a suicide and you're called, everybody's emotions are way up here. It's just a method to get them from here to here so that then you can have a conversation. So we'd be happy to offer that to your church. We're gonna do it to the First Baptist for their minister and staff, so if we can help you in that way or any other way, we're here to serve you.
Appreciate it.